It modified it in such a way that, wow, I'm impressed. Hello, welcome to CS Dose. In this thank you for that. In this video, we're going to create a weather application. This weather application consists of two parts, the backend and the front end. The backend will be written in Java with Spring Boot, and the front end will be written in, I don't know, C#, I guess, Xamarin Forms. I've never used Xamarin Forms before, but this is the whole point, to see if ChatGPT can help you increase your productivity, make you a super developer, so to speak. And the ultimate test would be to see how much it can help me with a technology that I absolutely know nothing about, as opposed to, say, Spring or Java. So I'll try and generate two apps, one for Android and one for iOS, from the same code base. The backend is basically going to just query a weather API and get the results and then serve them to the users. We're going to be deploying the backend to AWS just to host it somewhere. I'm going to reuse one of the projects that I created earlier in a video earlier that you can check it out. It's called Amazon CDK Introduction or Crash Course. I'll link it somewhere here and in the description as well. It's just going to allow us to execute a couple commands and have the Spring Boot service deployed to AWS with virtually no effort. All right, so we begin by going to google.com and I'm gonna look for Spring Initializer. And this application or website, if you're not familiar, it's just going to generate a Spring Boot application for you, like the boilerplate code, so you don't have to type it in yourself. So we pick Maven as our dependency manager, and we add web as a dependency. And then we click on generate. Let's open that. Let's actually open this with IntelliJ. So I'm going to copy this, put it in the code folder, rename this to weather app, fire up my IntelliJ, open code weather app. So IntelliJ now should be able to recognize that it's dealing with a Maven based. Yep, so it's recognized POM file and it's already resolving the dependencies. Okay, so we have a very simple application in there, nothing much in here. I'm going to go back to Edge. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, how do I add actuator to my Spring Boot application? Now, if you're not familiar, actuator is just simply an API that gets added to your application and that allows for health checks. So we're going to need that if we're going to deploy the application to AWS. So I'm just going to add that dependency in there. So dependency. And I'm going to run this. Postman as well. New HTTP request, localhost, actuator health. Okay, so I may need to import everything, kill the app, then run it again. Go to Postman, and it's working. All right, so for the weather API, I was thinking about using OpenMeteo. It's a free weather API that's easy to use and requires no API key, which is very important for me just to avoid the hassle for the purposes of the demo. So if you go to documentation, they have a URL builder. I'm going to put in Dublin. That's where I am. Temperature, daily weather variables. limit it to 1 day. So that's the chart of the temperature for today in Dublin. And if you want to get that data in JSON format, that's it. So I'm going to copy the data. I'm going to put it in a JSON formatter that's easy to see. So it's giving me back the latitude, longitude of Dublin. It's giving me the time it took to generate the query data. And this has to do with how much offset from the time zone. Forget about that. And this is the time zone used, which is GMT, the time in Dublin. And elevation of Dublin is probably 17. Yeah, roughly. And then I have an object here with 2 items. So these are the time and temperature units. So here we have time and temperature arrays. So the time array has, so today's date is the 10th of March, and then starting from hour 0, hour 1, 2, 3, all the way until 23. All right. And the same goes for the corresponding temperatures. So it was 3 at hour 0, was 2.6, or should be 2.6 at hour, it is hour 23 now. So you get the gist of it. So going back to Edge, that's the URL that we're going to be using in our backend to request this data, and then we're going to probably store it in a cache so that we don't have to keep requesting the same data, the same city over and over and over. We just request it once and maybe store it for, 15 minutes, and then we can invalidate that cache and request it again. So we're going to head over to Edge. Remember this URL we used to request the data? We're going to paste it in ChatGPT. This is a sample output of calling API. So it's pretty much the stuff that we gone over before. So I wrote this. I have a Spring Boot application that I would like, upon receiving a request for weather forecast, to go and request the data from this endpoint and store it in a cache with a minute expiry time and serve it back to the client. All right. It's an example of how you implement caches data in a minute expiry time. Okay, just repeating what I said. So you need to add those dependencies. So there is a Spring Starter cache. Okay. That's not PHP. IntelliJ, one file. Here's another dependency. Right. Create a weather forecast service. So let's copy the code. So, perhaps in here, I can create a new package, services, and in there, I'm going to create a new class, weather forecast service. What was the content of that? Okay, let's have a look at this. Not AutoWire, no beans found for REST template. Okay, so apparently it hasn't generated the beans. Couldn't find. Okay, so we have that already. And can't find the bean for that REST template. All right, thank you. So I'm going to create app config. So I'm going to go in demo, and add a package called config. And in there, I'm going to create a class called app config. It's a configuration class with a bean that defines a new REST template. Okay, now it's not complaining about this. This needs to be imported, I believe. This class is okay. Going back to Edge, we're going to copy the controller. If we can find it in the page, this one here. So it is called weather forecast controller. So I'm going to create a package here. I'm going to call it controllers, and in there we get a class. Go back to Edge and copy the code. Go to IntelliJ, paste it over here. Import class, import the service, and that should do get mapping. So let's see what's going to happen if we call this weather forecast. And it looks like it's basically at the root of the service. So it should look like in Postman. So when we call this, what's going to happen is it's going to get weather forecast. Notice how we hard-coded the latitude and longitude. So we need to fix that in a bit. And it's using this annotation cacheable. Do you remember we had imported this Spring Boot starter cache? So going back here, you request a get weather forecast, and then you're saying the response entity is get for entity, and you're giving it the URL and the class string. Maybe we can fix that because we know that our object, I mean, we're not going to do any manipulation on it. So we could leave it string, because you see that response we get, unless we want to manipulate it, we could just leave it string. But hey, string will do, I guess. So you get status code. If it's okay, you return the body. If not, you return null. Okay, looks good to me. Let's give that a go. Run. And I'm gonna go in Postman. And there you have it. We got the response. And notice that we got that response in 381 milliseconds. If we request again, it's gone down to 77, 64, 61, etc., etc. Now, how do we know that this cache is actually working the way it's supposed to do? I have a very simple test to make sure that we're not going to the API every single time we are requesting the value. So let me show you. All right, so the test is pretty simple. Every time we are requesting this API from my computer, I will be able to sniff that request and see it here in charts. And if you look at the content, that's the response that we got here. Neatly formatted, but if you want to look at the row response, well, that's the row response right here, matching this one. So I'm going to clear everything in Charles, and I'm going to have it spy on weather app. So let's start it again. And if it's caching properly, it should, for the first time, go to the API, get the value, cache it, and then the next time it shouldn't go to the API, right? So if you go to Postman and we send, we go back, we see that there was a request made to the API. And that's the JSON we got back, which is the same JSON we got in Postman. All right. You can ask Postman to neatly display it for you. So what happens if we request again? Well, we have another request now that took a bit less time to execute. And I would say it's probably because there is some caching happening at the API side. but I don't see any caching happening here. And that might be the reason why we were seeing earlier that the time dropped from 390 milliseconds to 51 milliseconds. Well, it was mainly, because of optimizations on Spring's side, but also because of this drop. So if you go ahead and request it now, go back, took 410. If you request again very quickly, let's request a few times and go back there and see, yeah. So these entries are apparently being cached for a very, very short time at the backend at the weather API's backend. So that speed is not because of the cache annotation that we have here. So I thought before we fix the cache problem that we go and parameterize the URL that we use to request the data from the API, because you see, when we fix that, we're going to end up creating a location class, and that location class will serve as instances of that class will serve as the key to our cache. So let's look after that first, get the flow running without the cache, then we can fix the cache problem. All right, so I'm going to ask it to create a class for me called location. Well, it has longitude and latitude as floating point. So we could go with what it suggested to do the getters and setters ourselves. However, what I would like to suggest is, can you use Lombok? So Lombok is really an annotation-based way of creating these. So when you have data annotation on the class, it would automatically generate these things once the code is compiled. So it's just a nicer, handier way, and it's also generated a no args constructor and an all args constructor. Okay, so I'm going to say, can you give me the dependency to add to my POM file? So we copy the dependency first. So we paste that in, and then we are good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and create this new class, and I'm going to create a new package, call it models, and in there I'm going to create a new Java class called location, and in there I'm going to paste this code, use IntelliJ to import. All right, now we can use this class in our controller to receive these longitude and latitude as arguments to our weather forecast API. So let's go back to Edge and say, okay, so I asked it, can you modify the controller so that it receives an object of type location? And it sure did. It modified this method, get weather forecast, to receive two values actually, latitude and longitude, and then it would create a new location in there, and then it would pass it on to the get weather forecast. And then the get weather forecast, it modified it in such a way that, wow, I'm impressed. So remember how the URL looked like here? It actually recognized that latitude and longitude, the two parameters here, need to be removed out of the original URL. I don't see them here anymore. And then it's added them to the end, sort of like this. And at the end. So that's very impressive. And it's going to generate the same output. It doesn't really matter where every parameter is, like the ordering of the parameters is not really that big of an issue. So I'm going to paste it in and import the location, quest params, and then it's complaining that this doesn't take any arguments. So we need to go back to Edge get the updated service, and then go back to IntelliJ, go to the service, and you want to paste the service again. Import the location class, and there you go. All right, so let's run it again after the changes have been made. And we notice that we don't have the parameters in this URL. So if we try to send the request, we're getting a bad request because we don't have the required parameters. A handy way of getting those parameters is just to copy them from here. So let me copy that, go back to Postman, put them in, send again, and there you go. So I'm going to fire up Charles to verify if the caching works. I don't know if you noticed, but it has updated the cacheable annotation. So, oops, let's see if that's gonna work or not. So I'm gonna send a request. Charles has recorded that a request has been made. It took 226 milliseconds. Going back to Postman, send again, Charles. Well, it's been sent again. So I'm not really happy about the solution it gave me. So I'm going to go back to Edge and say, can you create a cache class that I can use to cache my weather data? I would like it to have a generic object key. All right, let's see what it generates for us now. All right, so it's generating the class. Let's have a look at the class. It's cached, it's taken two generic objects, one being the key or this map. So we're using the map data structure. So before I forget, it's quite important to have equals and hash code for the key that we're going to be using. So going back to Edge. So cache entry is another class that I think it might have defined here. Yeah, so that's the cache entry class. And you've got a method that goes put and a method that goes get. Okay, so if the cache entry, so it's going to try and get from the cache map the entry. And if it's not null, and it hasn't expired. Okay, so for this cache entry, there is an expiration, is expired. And what is the expiry? And okay, so every time you create a cache entry, you can set the expiry time. So at the put, okay, so it's saying that it receives the expiry time as a parameter every time you put an element. So you have control over how long you would like that entry to stay in. All right, that looks cool. So if the entry is not null and it hasn't expired, then you can return it safely. And if it has expired or it doesn't exist, it's going to return an optional of empty. So this looks good to me. I can work with this definitely. I'm gonna copy this, go in here, and I'm gonna, it's not a service, so to speak. So I'm going to, let me think about that. So I'm going to create a utils package. And in the utils, I'm going to create a new, what was it class called? Cache. So IntelliJ, cache, paste all that in. Perfect. All right, so I'm asking it now, can you create a service that maintains an instance of this cache? Because we need an instance of the cache class, and use it as a service and have it sent to the location service via its constructor. So let's see if it can help us with that. Indeed, it did. It created a service with our forecast cache service, and it has two methods, put and get. Let's copy that. Should copy the name first. And in the services, Java class, Going back to Edge, copying this, import some classes. Perfect. Now I'm going to ask it to modify the weather forecast service to can you modify? So I'm asking it if it can modify the weather forecast service. As you can see, it got rid of the cacheable annotation that was here. So that's a good start. Let's go to the weather forecast service. I'm going to replace the code in here with the new code. See what it did. So like I said, it receives the cache service in the constructor and stores it in a local file. All right, so in the get weather forecast, I'm seeing that it's creating cache key, but it's not being used anywhere. I guess had the key been string, so I don't know if you remember. Here, the key is an object. It's an object of type location. It's not a string. So I don't know what it's doing here. I guess that was just added by mistake because apparently it's using the location object that's being passed from the constructor to it as the key. So it's trying to get the location. If the cache result is null, then it's going to, if the cache result is not null, then it's going to return it. Else it's going to do the whole thing that it was doing earlier, construct a query and send it over. And then when it puts the data in, it's caching for 1 minute. So let's try that again and see how that's gonna work. I'm gonna go to Charles and clear the data from there. Go back to IntelliJ, it's loaded up. So go to Postman, send a request. Go to Charles, here's one request. Go to Postman again, send another request. Charles, there's no additional request that was made. Go to Postman and look at the time it took. It took 10 milliseconds to serve that request. So remember before, it was something like 400 milliseconds, then maybe 50 milliseconds, because it was still going over the network and there was a cache happening at the API side. And then it was serving the cached value to our backend that was serving it to Postman. But now we're seeing the strength of having cache in the backend of our service, not, and this is actually part of the reason why you wouldn't want to create clients that directly talk to the API. You would probably want them to talk to the API through your service. So it's sort of like a proxy situation where you have control over the data that gets served to your users. You can also switch the service provider. So you can have multiple providers, say OpenMeteo is down, and then you're trying in your logic here to query OpenMeteo and it doesn't work. Then basically you can have some logic here that goes, okay, OpenMeteo doesn't work. We're gonna have to head over to another API for weather and get the data from there, so that our users don't experience this downtime that is happening at OpenMeteo. So we can have plan A, plan B, plan C, and we can also manipulate the data before we send it back to the user. Another reason to use your own backend is because, say OpenMeteo changes their data layout or the shape of the data that is sending back, then you can simply just push an update to your backend, and then your clients do not need to update their phones to get the latest update that fixes that data shape problem. So it makes a lot of sense to have your backend service for many reasons. So I guess we're done with the backend. I'm pretty satisfied. Let's go ahead and deploy that to AWS using CDK, and then we can create the front-end clients to use it. All right, so let's deploy the application to AWS. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and head over to CloudFormation, Stacks. At the moment we have nothing. I want you to clone this application that I have, or this repository, simple Spring Boot service application. I did a video explaining that repository in great detail. If you want to see it, just click on the link here or check out the link down below. So I already have it cloned. It's in here. I'm gonna load it up in IntelliJ. First, open. Okay. So what do we have here? We have a Spring Boot service, and we have the infrastructure that's going to be deployed to AWS. And right here, all we have is a very basic application that just starts. Now, let's replace let's pay attention actually, com.example. And let's replace our existing, the existing project that's here with the project that we created. All right, so we're gonna start by, let's see if we can drag and drop this thing here. Factor, yeah, worked. And then move other application. And yeah, we also want to move the dependencies that we have here. Let's copy all these dependencies. And okay, the build here is different, I guess. Yeah, so the build here is a bit more sophisticated, so we should actually pay attention to weather application here instead of, and we should get rid of this. Where's the delete? Okay, and what was the last thing? Oh, POM file. So we have web. Okay, yeah, doesn't matter. Paste these in. Just clean up a little bit. Okay. I believe we don't need this anymore. This can be our project. And this isn't the case anymore. Keep weather application. Enable annotation processing. Oh, I see. So let's do a refactor and replace that with nothing to fix these issues. Let's run again. That's good. It's running. Go Postman. And it's running fine. Now, just to test that this is going fine and it's not going to give us any trouble, let's go in simple Spring Boot application and Maven clean package. And that should basically create a jar file within the target folder. And that jar file is going to be encapsulated within a Docker image and then deployed to AWS. So what we want to do is to verify that the jar file, java-jar, will execute. Yeah, so it's executing our Spring Boot service. So let's just give it some time to load up. So as you can see, this is not running here. If you go back to Postman, it's working fine and it's logged the request. If you kill it and try again, it doesn't work. So let's do the other step, which is to go back to infra, CDK synth. Okay. It's no problem. So generated a CloudFormation template that I can use now to execute CDK deploy. Now that might fail actually. That might fail because we don't have exactly the toolkit stack. So remember here, we don't have anything, nothing. So we may need to CDK bootstrap. Okay, so I'm going to execute this. All right, so I filled in my account number and the region and executed the command. And there you have it, a CDK toolkit stack. So now I can execute CDK deploy. You want to make sure that Docker is running in the background. So right now it's going to start making the Docker image. All right, so as you can see, it started deploying. If you go here and you refresh, you see example app being created in progress. All right, so I'm going to pause the video for now and we continue once it's finished. All right, so as you can see, the application creation is finished. And if you go to outputs, you will have these two links in here. So really click on any of them and it will take you to the root directory of the application. If you copy, so that would be the equivalent of the root directory that we're seeing in Edge. And if you copy this part, if I can get it right, and paste it in there, then that's going to request the data from the API and then serve it back. And if you request it again, comes back hopefully a little bit faster. Yeah. So let's look at some numbers in Postman. So right now it came back in 97 milliseconds and then 46 milliseconds, 44 milliseconds, 39. So that's not bad. Now remember, this is a cached value. So if we change that, let's say to 2.3, then the cache will fail. And it came back in 187 milliseconds. And then the next time 130, next time 37 milliseconds, 38 milliseconds. Okay, so let's build the front end using Xamarin and display this data in hopefully a nicer way than what we're looking at the moment. Okay, now I need to just make sure that I set your expectations right. I've never used Xamarin. I mean, I just created an empty project now and I ran it, but beyond that, I have no experience. So that's going to be the true test of ChatGPT. Can it help me just bullshit my way around and get a working app? So, and also, by the way, I don't have any experience using C#. I'm aware it looks similar to Java, but still no experience. So, I did download Visual Studio and I'm going to create a new, I created this one, multi-platform projects. I'm just going to call it weather app. And okay, create. Oh yeah, it exists. I created it already. Well, that's the backend here, so I'm not gonna overwrite that. Front end, not the best name, but hey, just to get the clash resolved. Okay, so like I said, I don't know what's going on here. There's a bunch of XML that I'm told is pronounced XAML. And there is a main page, but it has CS, which I believe stands for C#. And that's probably our main page from the name, main page of the app. And weather app frontend.app. So that's a class somewhere. Weather app frontend app. Okay. So I have no idea what partial is. Doesn't matter. So we have this class that has a XML associated with it. And from the looks of it, it's like the main container of, now I might be wrong, so don't quote me here. It looks like it's the main container of the app, And then this is a page within the app, if I understood correctly. And the page has a content page tag, which means this page has got some content in it, as opposed to in the app was application tag. So yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm onto something here. So content page has got a bunch of namespace, so XML namespace. These are like probably the places where you can go and find the definitions for. Right, so that's probably the namespace for the forms. And this is for X, whatever X. Oh, all right. So they're using X as like a prefix. It's like a namespace, so to speak. So it's a prefix where you can get some Microsoft schemas. Okay. And then you got weather app frontend. Oh, okay. So that's like the package. The package is the name of the app, I guess. So we named it weather app dash frontend. It doesn't probably like the dashes in the name of the app, so it replaced it with an underscore. Let's run the application now and see what's gonna happen. I have no idea. I mean, it should really display a frame that has this background color, then a bunch of labels under. So you got yourself a label that goes start developing now. Make changes to your XAML file and try to save and see your UI update in the running app with XAML hot reload. Give it a try. And then formatted text, formatted string, dot spans. And then here's a formatted span that goes learn more at, and then a URL. And it's bold. And that's it. Do we even need to run it? Speaking of, okay, right. So that's everything we saw here. Let's try and change something. Oh God. Oh God, what's going on? Did I mess something up? Okay. Broken. All right. So I've restarted Visual Studio and it looks like if we make changes now, it's not going to automatically explode. So that's how you write application. Right. Let's head over to ChatGPT and ask it to build the app for us. I'm going to copy the URL and tell it I have deployed this to AWS. This backend Spring Boot app to AWS. Okay. I'm going to say this is the sample response that we get from calling the URL. Oh, well, I didn't actually give it the response, but it went ahead and generated the response for us. I guess it remembered from the time I passed on to it. Wow, it's impressive. All right, so given the above, I'm interested in improving on a newly generated Xamarin boilerplate app in Visual Studio to display the data in a neat way. Can you guide me through that? All right, so it's asked us to create a blank app, which we did, and in the main page.xaml, which is this one here, it's asking us to paste this in. So copy that. And content page. Oh, it's not the same name we're given it. Namespace is different. Okay. All right, so we have a label, which is here, hourly forecast. And then we have a list view. Okay. Inside of which there's an item template. So will be a bunch of items, and this is what the template will look like. It's got a data template inside, a view cell inside, And then a stack layout, I guess that's the individual item in the list. And then in there, the orientation is horizontal, obviously, and then you have two labels next to each other. And one is binded to time and the other to temperature. Okay. Sounds interesting. All right, so the code behind will be using this code. Visual Studio. So it generated the code for us. I had an issue with this package, and it turned out if you go to manage NuGet packages, then you can select the package and install it. And that should resolve all the issues in the file except for, is this forecast list.items source? I did see it here. I am not sure. Okay, it does not exist in the current contacts. Oh, the error is gone. Okay. I just hit save on this file and then the error was gone. So let's start again the app and see if that's going to work. And the app is launching and we have an exception that's been thrown. Clear text HTTP traffic to blah, blah, blah is not permitted. Okay, continue. And the app crashed. So I asked GPT, why is the application crashing on Android emulator? And it's saying to me that I should be using HTTPS. Now I've deployed my application, my backend already. I'm not going to change that. Now the other way is to just allow clear text traffic. Now this is probably not very useful for a Xamarin project. So I did Google it and I got this answer. If you go ahead and plug that in this file, assembly info.cs for the Android project, and then run this again, it should work, hopefully. So there you go, it's firing up and boom, we have our weather data. Now the problem with this approach is, well, first of all, it doesn't look like an app, it looks like a list. And the other problem is there's no way of re-requesting the data or changing the parameters. They're all hard-coded in. So let's change that. But before we do, I'm gonna kill it. So running the application now against iOS, we're going to expect probably a similar error due to the fact that we're not using HTTP. So I copied this error and I Googled it. And I got this answer that goes, I need to open my info.plist and create a key called NS app transport security as a dictionary. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. This is the info.plist, and I'm going to create a new dictionary called, yeah. Okay, and in there, probably add a subkey called ns allow arbitrary loads as Boolean and set the value to yes. So going back to Visual Studio, it's the property name, it's a Boolean, and it's yes. That should probably do. If that answer was correct, we should be able to allow arbitrary loads and run the application and see the results. Yay, it's running. So now we've created an application that works on both platforms that just queries our API, gets a list, and displays it. Let's make it so that we can provide the latitude and longitude through a text box and then maybe hit a button and then see the list generated for us. That's the next part. Right, so for this part, I've asked it, I'd like to make the latitude, longitude editable by the user, and it generated for me the main page or the content page of the main page again. So we can go in Visual Studio and replace that in main page.xaml. It's the content page part and put the correct space in there. And now it's expecting get weather forecast function. It's complaining about this function. Now the function exists here, but I saw that it generated that function again, and there you have it. So the function probably has to have this signature. So let's copy that, go back to Visual Studio, and I'm just gonna go ahead and replace the whole function, the newly generated function. Now this function, well, first of all, doesn't exist, and we shouldn't have it in the, let's say, the constructor of the main page anyways, because now it should be driven by the input of the user. So if we save both files and running the app again, now we have the option to enter the latitude and the longitude. So going back to open Meteo, now you see you can be fancy if you like. Go on the documentation and in the URL builder, and you see this thing. This is probably connected to, well, not probably, it's definitely connected to some sort of API. And when you type in Dublin and you hit enter, so inspecting the traffic, this is a search endpoint with a response that goes Dublin. It's giving you the ID of the city in their data store, and it's giving you the longitude and the latitude. So if you copy link address and you replace that with my hometown, Amman, you're gonna get different longitudes and latitudes. So let's actually get the weather forecast in my home city. So starting with the latitude, we're gonna copy that, go back to Visual Studio, and I'm gonna paste that in, go back to Edge, and take the longitude. Okay. Paste that in here. And then let's get the weather forecast for my hometown. So midnight is 15, then 1 a.m. would be 14. Let's see, about 11 a.m. will be 23, nice weather. And it will fall down to around 12. Let's close this and run the Android application just to verify that it works as well. So we can try another city here. So we can try, we got the latitude for London here. Going back to Visual Studio. Okay. And the latitude, which is minus. So going back to the app, and paste that in, and we can get the weather forecast. And there you have it. All right, that's it for this video. I mean, the video has gotten too long already. I would have loved it if I spent more time fixing the UI and make it look like a real app. But let me know if you'd like to see part 2 where I make the UI a little bit prettier than it is right now. GPT has proven itself yet again to be a very powerful tool for software development. I mean, if you're a software developer and you're not using it to automate some of your daily tasks, you're really missing out on a lot of productivity. Hopefully you're not sharing sensitive information with it. You're just asking it generic questions. Because if you're working for a company or a corporation, you shouldn't really be sharing proprietary code with it. But if you're asking it to, hey, generate a cache class for me, and then you can take that cache class, read it, make sure it works the way you want it to work, and then use it within your project, then that's just a massive productivity boost. So in any case, I hope you found this video useful, and I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.